Hello there, traveler. My name is Kat. I'm an astronomer. The pleasure is all mine, darling. I've never met a person so polite and well-mannered. No human, anyway. No, that's astrology. Pseudoscientific bunk. I'm an astronomer. I study the sky, and I don't tolerate idiocy. Oh, so you dabble in the sciences. Wonderful. Perhaps you'd like to be my assistant, or even better, my protege. Ah, of course. Just because the world isn't worth a nickel in a dime store, doesn't mean the sky isn't still its illustrious self. One only needs to look up to see what humanity can still discover. Of course, I should mention, I'm not just any astronomer. My study is specific to one particular field, extraterrestrial life. Well, that's rude. I'd slap you, but you're covered in filth of the wasteland, and I don't want to get my hands dirty. But I digress. Copernicus was crazy. Galileo, Newton, and countless others. Not at all. Such a distinction would put me in good company. Galileo and Copernicus were deemed mentally unfit and persecuted by lesser astronomers. I guess what I'm saying, darling, when you question my mental health, be sure you're not the one wearing the straitjacket. And that is what excites me so. We are frontiersmen of a different kind. We are braving the unknown, charting the uncharted, diving headfirst into the great expanse. If that doesn't shake you to your core, then I would check your pulse and make sure you aren't already dead. Well, yes. I don't deny my time is often limited by earthly considerations, but that is where people like yourself come in. Benefactors who will gladly donate their time and resources in exchange for that which is priceless. Knowledge. Still, if you're concerned about the practicalities of having me in your employ, I can provide you with schematics and weapons relevant to my study. As do I, darling. As do I. Yes, onwards we go. And hopefully, upwards as well. The abductions happen at night, darling, but point taken. Of course you do, my darling. Everyone that encounters my otherworldly charm assumes my story is as infinite as the cosmos. But I assure you, no life is as interesting as the stars. Not even mine. Yet I will do my best to make it so. So go ahead, ask away. For me, the thrill of discovery is enough. And would it be cruel to say that terrestrials bore me? Well, that's not entirely fair. I've never met an alien after all. Who's to say they aren't dreadful conversation partners? Why, indeed. I suppose, like all discoveries, the point is to not only learn about others, but learn about yourself. Yes. Are we alone? We most certainly are, in the metaphorical sense. But in the literal, it's highly unlikely. And meeting another species would not only offer us a chance to expand our sense of existence, but also offer a chance at self-reflection. If that's what invigorates you, darling, I will not deny you that pleasure. I personally would prefer a glass of red wine under a constellation of white-hot stars. But that's really the point, isn't it? In discovering others, we find out who we are. there's no denying that humanity is, more or less, a failed experiment. But it's an experiment that's been given a second roll of the dice. An encounter with an advanced civilization would give us something to aspire to be. Or at worst, give us an example of what not to become. And that's why I believe it's important. You have inadvertently said something quite wise. It is, after all, quite fair. Second chances are not something we're entitled to. It's best we don't squander it. Undoubtedly, it would provide us with a chance to change our fate. Hopefully, we can use that information to better effect this time around. You're right, darling. I didn't answer your question. Not truthfully, anyhow. The reality is, as a teenager, I planned on majoring in one of the standard disciplines. Chemistry, physics, or biology. For whatever reason, I never felt fulfilled. It all seemed so mundane. I read a poem, When I Heard the Learned Astronomer. I can recite it for you if you like. Very well, I will refrain. I will tell you, though, that when I read it, I looked up at the night sky, and for the first time in my career, I knew I had found my calling. Very well, but I assure you, it may invigorate you as it did me. Very well. When I Heard the Learned Astronomer, by Walt Whitman. When I heard the learned astronomer. When the proofs, the figures were ranged in columns before me. When I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them. When I sitting heard the astronomer where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room. How soon unaccountable I became tired and sick, till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself in the mystical, moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. And a reminder of how one should live their life. It's a good poem, but it also serves as an important reminder, whether you are a scientist or a scavenger. Exactly, darling. I feel it applies to everyone. From the astronomers who study the sky, to a mole miner burrowing tunnels in the ground. Well, there's no accounting for taste, is there? Especially a palate as dull as yours. But the message still applies. You can, darling. You just need to travel faster than the speed of light. If I smack you hard enough, you just might achieve it. But regardless, I think the overall message still applies. Science is the foundation for what we do, but not the foundation of why we do it. Gazing up at the stars, I felt a passion I didn't have for other fields. That is not something I will soon forget. I don't know if I ever have a free moment. When your life's work literally hangs over your head, it's always on your mind. Yes, like the Sword of Damocles, but that's hardly the case. Astronomy is what I love, but even a loved one can suffocate you at times. Is that so? Perhaps you're the extraterrestrial being I've been searching for all along. It would explain a lot. But alas, the rest of us ordinary humans need breaks, even from what we love. That sounds like a recipe for boredom. Personally, I believe in a balance. The stars in the sky are beautiful, no doubt. But without the empty space, the light would be blinding. However, if all you had was the void, you would feel empty and alone. In any case, to answer your question, I like to drink wine and play board games, believe it or not. It's the perfect way to disengage. Oh yes, we can make an entire night of it. Blast Radius, the Legendary Run, oh, they're all good choices. As cliché as it might sound, the Don't Be Bored Games Company really does what it claims. All the times I've played, I've never once been bored. And wouldn't we all like to be children once in a while? Perhaps it's time for you to relax and rediscover that childlike joy you've so clearly repressed. But I suppose doing adult things like murder and mayhem are just as therapeutic. Well, I'd be hard-pressed to choose just one, but I suppose I'm partial to the legendary run, despite all its flaws. We should definitely carve out some time to play together. Fair warning, though, I can get quite competitive. That sounds like an excuse, darling. You're your own boss. You can certainly make time for whatever recreation you need. It's not always the world that needs saving after all. Sometimes it's friendships. None I dare speak of publicly. My parents met under unusual circumstances. My mother being a former patient of Allegheny Asylum. For years they told me she was a nurse. When the scandal broke, she decided to confess to the lesser crime of being a patient. A nail file and a cake? That's their version at least. In reality, it was just university pressure. My father worked at VTU and was in need of Mother's help for a paper he was working on. He tracked her down, pulled some strings, and got her out. She stole a worker's uniform on the way out, though, which always amused me. Oh, yes. When your passion is studying little green men in flying saucers, it does beg the question, how far does the apple fall from the tree? I even found an actual apple tree and shook it with every muscle in my body. It was my own little Newtonian experiment. But in the midst of making a fool of myself, apples landing on my head, I realized I never had any reason to suspect my mother was ill. It wasn't until she told me her history that the thought wormed its way into my head. They died shortly after the war, thank goodness. At the time, it was quite traumatic, but now I realize they were spared the worst of it. As any curious mind should. What did you want to ask me? I'm of two minds, really. On the one hand, any sort of scientific curiosity and interest in astronomy is a positive force. On the other hand, if that information is presented in a scientifically inaccurate sideshow, some of that positivity goes to waste. But to your question, do I believe in little green men? Or that an evil green doctor is trying to thwart our attempts to travel through space? Well, I've seen no evidence to support that. But I'm not ruling it out entirely.
Where are my little elves?
I don't think it's impossible, no. It's no more ridiculous in mythology than any of our current religions. Whether it's a vengeful god or an evil doctor with a death ray, the stories originate from somewhere. Sometimes that story is a complete fiction, born from the imagination. Other times, it only seems that way. I find his portrayal to be more absurd than Dr. Zorbo, to be honest. But only because he's meant to be a mirror image of man. And we delude ourselves into thinking we're better than we are. Especially the men. It's not implausible. After all, the first organism in space was not a man, but a Persian house cat named Mr. Pebbles. We call ourselves brave explorers, and yet we've often had our pets do the dirty work that we are too cowardly to do. A character perfect for Hollywood. So thin, you can barely make her out. If the writers know their history, maybe her name's a reference to Annie Jump Cannon, the astronomer who discovered stellar spectra. I just wish they gave her more lines so we could know for sure. There is one tale that caught my interest. A story about flashing lights, floating octopi, and, curiously, the smell of hot dogs. Ugh, that would be dreadful. I would hope an interstellar species would have evolved past the point of consuming mystery meat. No, No. The hot dogs would be a reference to the workplace of one Colton Pickens, alien abductee. While I'm contractually obligated to agree with your dining decisions, I do hope you reconsider that thought. On the other hand, we've all had to consume much worse to survive, so who am I to judge Mr. Colton Pickens and his career choices? Surely you've been through Flatwoods and heard of the monster that haunts the surrounding forest. Well, it's my opinion that monster isn't a creature of this planet, but rather contact from an alien life form. Why it chose Mr. Colton Pickens as its emissary, however, is beyond me. Naturally, what some have described as a round octopus-like head, I believe to be a space helmet, which of course only leads to more questions. Is our atmosphere toxic to their species, or is it merely the composition? If only I could speak with the man who was abducted, Mr. Colton Pickens, I would be able to do more than hunt and peck for clues. I believe he was telling the truth. But his truth, or rather, the truth his abductors wanted us to know. Keep in mind, our dear hot dog vendor did not have to be returned. He did not have to be contacted. He could have easily been abducted and disappeared, and no one would have bothered to look for his remains. The question I struggle with is why. But not so drunk he forgot what happened. A simple cloth bag over the head would have also ensured he never caught view of his abductor. And he did view him, in stunning detail. Gray skin, black eyes. That is my theory, although it doesn't explain why he'd make claims of experimentation. Surely if you were a party guest in my home, you'd leave with a more glowing endorsement. My explanation for that is simple. Cultural differences. That's always a possibility, but why bother with such an outlandish lie? There's no motive for it. It would only reduce his standing in the community, and make him the subject of gossip. Would that not seem rather inefficient? We have ample medical records, information that could be easily obtained at a local library. Nor would I think a man who lives selling and consuming hot dogs to be a model representative of humankind. The military aspect did cross my mind. Although again, from a tactical perspective, I don't see the value in not abducting him blind. If the perpetrator were indeed wearing a spacesuit, that would reveal a rather glaring weakness should they invade. In any case, part of me is envious of our dear Colton. It makes me wonder what the criteria is for abduction, and why I can't seem to meet it. Yes, I have. Suffice to say, I was quite disappointed with what I found. And I don't mean the army of hostile robots. But I suppose it's not the first time scientific discovery has been used as a front for ulterior motives. In this case, weather manipulation. Yes, but if that were your motive, you should advertise it plainly. It's like when my ex told me she loved books, and I'd find her novels while I was on travel as a gift. It would have saved both of us a lot of trouble if she admitted she couldn't read. Although, I suppose the inability to read road signs was the first clue. But she was cute, so I believed her. Well, I do have plenty of fashionable winter wear, but it helps to have some measure of predictability. Imagine diving into the pool in your two-piece bathing suit, only to find the water half frozen by the time you descend. Even if I survived the fall, I'd still need to have my lawyers file a rather lengthy suit. Yes, I imagine quite a bit of taxpayer money was used to fund the project. But those are concerns of a world we no longer inhabit. I used to chide my ex for not paying more in taxes. But seeing the wars we funded, clearly, the last laugh is hers. The way you said that, with a twisted smile and furrowed brow, doesn't give me confidence you'd use it responsibly. They are an interesting lot, no doubt, but their motives leave me suspicious. I would almost prefer villains like Dr. Zorbo, who laugh maniacally and wear their brains on their head. Villains who look and talk like us are far more insidious. My apologies, darling. Villain is the wrong word. They are hoarders, and the natural inclination of a hoarder is not to share. If they were to discover the body of an alien species and their technology, I don't think they'd be announcing their findings in the Watoga Times. But I suppose they also wouldn't sell those ray guns to the local raider clans, so at least there's that. None that have been confirmed, but many whom I've suspected. There was the ex who pronounced sugar bombs with a long S. Extremely suspicious, that one. There was my pet tabby cat, Herschel, named after Caroline, who seemingly teleported from place to place, although I never witnessed the act. And of course there's you, who I find unlike anyone I've ever met before. Well, that or you're just a highly productive, high-performing, and high-functioning individual. That is one too many highs, and I don't even use chems. Still, a cursory examination of your body shows you are human. Not that I've done anything more in-depth, of course. That would be inappropriate. Maybe. It would make sense for aliens to disguise themselves as felines, after all. They come and go as they please, and yet are often adopted and cared for by humans, allowing for easy observation. If you have a few hours, I could probably tell you all about her. Suffice to say, thinking about the experience is difficult to stomach. If I'm being perfectly honest, I only started dating her because I thought she was an alien. So, my eventual disappointment was on several levels. Naturally, darling. What can I do for you? You'll find my shop items to be out of this world. Do you have a favorite constellation? I've always been partial to Pegasus. A clear sky bodes well for tonight. You mean, besides my winsome personality? For one, I can help you use your scopes more effectively. Whether you use that scope to gaze at the stars, or target the head of a blood eagle, is up to you. Then you shall have it. When walking the tightrope of life, never look down. Of course. One has to make a living, after all. In this world, we can hardly depend on wealthy benefactors and the kindness of strangers. But rest assured, anything I sell to you has been thoroughly investigated, poked, prodded, and inquired. In short, they have exhausted their scientific value and must now enter their second phase of life as a commodity. Aristotle believed the universe was composed of 4 elements: earth, water, wind, and fire. He also listed a 5th element to describe the heavens: ether. It's that fifth element. That unknown particle that stretches the cosmos. That is my calling. If I were to ever make contact with alien life, I'm not sure what my reaction would be. I'd like to think I'd boldly introduce myself, but my gut reaction might be to hide behind you. Do you have a favorite constellation? I've always been partial to Pegasus. Nothing more depressing than clouds. The stars are tucked away, and their light shines for no one. A clear sky bodes well for tonight. I love classical music. It always puts me in a thinking mood. I save jazz for when I want my mind to dance. When walking the tightrope of life, never look down. You're not so bad, you know. You might even be swell. Aristotle believed the universe... Here on Earth, I've met my share of harebrains and nincompoops. It'd be foolish to assume alien life doesn't have its fair share of the same. Nothing more depressing than clouds. The stars are tucked away, and their light shines for no one. Almost all unknown phenomena can be attributed to the extraterrestrial. Witchcraft, paranormals, gray hairs that you're absolutely certain you plucked the day before, all of it can be attributed to alien interference. The earliest recorded abduction was in Salem in 1697. There's a tape of a man who claims to have been swept up into a great spaceship in the sky.